We do know a lot. We have a lot of questions, but I would very much like to talk to Scott Ritter now, because I have seen some video clips with him, and he's one of the most interesting people and one of the most knowledgeable people with respect to the current crisis in Ukraine. Scott, are you with us?
I am. Good morning.
Oh, wow. Great. Scott, I just mentioned I saw a great video, a great interview that you did for Rick Walker and Brendan Kennedy, two Canadians. And all of us were really impressed because it sort of confirmed what many geopoliticians had told us about the situation in Ukraine. Meaning we're only seeing one little piece of the picture, which is probably falsified by the mainstream media. All of the geopoliticians who we spoke with told us there is another side to this story, and one of the best people to talk to is Scott Ritter. Go ahead.
No, you have me. So I'm glad to be here, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Yes. One of the things you said in that video, in that interview, is that you would not for a second deny that the Ukrainian troops are very competent. They have received billions of dollars from NATO or the U.S. Over the last, decade or so. Well-trained, lots of soldiers. On the other hand, they cannot win this war. Why is that?
Well, I mean, military math is why. I'll bring up a movie that, or at least a movie reference or a piece of history that has become sort of myth. Mm-hmm. King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans in the Battle of Thermopylae. I mean, these depending on which movie you saw, these guys are all stud warriors. They can thrust spears better than anybody, hoo-yah better than anybody. But at the end of the day, when 1,000,000 arrows come out of the sky, 300 really brave Spartans die. The Ukrainians are not the Spartans. They're very good soldiers. They're very well equipped, and many of them are fighting for a cause that they believe in, either a right-wing ideology that many in the world find odious, or for their homeland, which many in the world can sympathize with. But either way, they're fighting for a cause that allows them to overcome some of the morale-based issues that usually cause armed forces trouble, like when you get hungry, when you get thirsty, when you run low on ammunition, when you're suffering casualties. These are the things that tend to break militaries. The Ukrainians have shown a surprising resilience, the ability to stay on and fight. But even despite all this, at the end of the day, military math is military math. The Russians have been able, through a very brilliant campaign that emphasizes some of the basic tenets of maneuver warfare, shape the battlefield. And Vladimir Putin alluded to this when he spoke about initiating the special military operation. He said, originally, all we wanted to do is go in and secure the Donbass. But then we were confronted by this mass of Ukrainian troops, between 60 and 100,000, that have accumulated right on the border of Donbass. What do we do about them? And if we focus our effort on them, what do we do about the rest of the Ukrainian military? All 260, well, let's say 100,000 are there. There's still 160,000 more out there in Ukraine with reserves that could amount to another 300,000. Then you throw on, the popular militias that they've mobilized another 100, 200,000. There's a lot of Ukrainians out there. And if you just focus on the Donbass battle, you've ceded the initiative to the Ukrainians to respond in a way that benefits them. So Russia had to shape the larger battlefield by threatening Kiev, diverting Ukrainian resources there, by securing a land bridge that facilitated lines of communication between Crimea and the main part of Russia. That involved, seizing Mariupol, et cetera, by carrying out a very extensive strategic air campaign that neutralized Ukrainian logistics and command and control. This was phase one of the operation. And Russia executed this very well. But a lot of people, what I'm talking about right now is what I call big arrow war. That's strategic thinking, big arrow with big arrow results. A lot of people get caught down into what I call the little arrow war. That means when you get down into the weeds, war is ugly. And when you fight an army that is as capable as Ukrainians, ugly things are going to happen to you. This isn't all about Russia dominating the tactical situation 100%. It's actually most combat is a 50-50 proposition going in. People give as well as they take until some advantage is achieved on the battlefield, whether it be a maneuver advantage, a firepower advantage, something of that nature that tilts the balance in your favor, and then you gradually get control and move. But very rarely in modern war against a capable enemy, you overwhelm them immediately. A grinding battle, which means, guess what? There's going to be videotapes of Russian columns that have been destroyed. There's going to be videotapes of destroyed Russian equipment, captured Russian troops, dead Russian soldiers. And the media has played these over and over again, creating the illusion of a Russian defeat. But if you walk away from the videos and look at the map, you'll see that it's a strategic Russian victory that's taking place. It's unfolding slower than it would have if the Russians used their traditional doctrine, which emphasizes heavy firepower and massed attack. The Russians made a decision going in that they were not going to do this because that would result in massive civilian casualties and damage to the civilian infrastructure. So Russia has taken a lighter approach, one that actually puts them at a tactical disadvantage. One of the reasons why the Russians are suffering casualties is that they have foregone their advantage in the application of firepower. Because if you pound the Ukrainian soldiers to death, you're also pounding Ukrainian civilians to death. And the Russians have said, we don't want to do that. Yeah, are civilians dying? Absolutely. That's a tragic outcome of war. But when you look, again, military math, in the study of military history, when you study modern war, generally speaking, the ratio of dead civilian to dead combatant comes down to roughly 1 to 1. You could go up to 1.2 to 1, 1.3 to 1, et cetera, but roughly 1 to 1. That is, for every civilian killed, there's a dead combatant, whether it be a Russian or a Ukrainian. Here, we have a situation where for every civilian killed, you have around 5 or 6 dead combatants. Wow. What does that tell you? It tells you that the fighting that's taking place is being done in a manner that seeks to avoid unnecessary civilian casualties. Now, people will say, well, what about all the residential neighborhoods that are being bombed? Now we come to the problem. Mm-hmm. They're being bombed not because Russia says, hey, I want to bomb a residential area. They're being bombed because the Ukrainians have decided to turn that residential area into a military target, either through making its line of defense there or putting logistics, equipment, et cetera, that requires an attack. So what casualties are taking place on the battlefield aren't because the Russians have decided to undertake a course of action that kills civilians. It's because the Ukrainians have decided to create a battlefield where the civilians live. And this is problematic because the international humanitarian law, the laws of war, prohibit the use of human shields. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians are doing. By allowing civilians to be integrated into the battlefield, the Ukrainians are creating a de facto human shield. And, so when all these allegations out here about war crimes, this, war crimes, that, at the end of the day, if you dig deep into every single one of these issues, you will find more often than not that the problem isn't Russia, the problem is Ukraine. And again, this all plays into a perception that's being portrayed by the media that is negative towards what Russia is doing. I'm not here to cheer on the Russians. They made a geopolitical strategic decision that they have to explain to the world at some point. They've tried to justify it through Article 51, preemptive collective self-defense. I believe they have a case, but it's a tough case to make. And it's someday they're going to have to make that case. I'm not sitting here saying that Ukraine doesn't have sovereign rights. They do. I'm just talking about the reality on the ground. Regardless of which side you're on, the reality on the ground is that Russia is winning this conflict. Moreover, Russia will win this conflict.
You said in that aforementioned video that right from the start, it was clear that Russia wasn't really trying to take over Ukraine. If they had wanted that, they would have had to go in, and again, this is military math, they would have had to go in with a force of soldiers 3 times as many as the Ukrainians, meaning 1.8 million soldiers, I believe, because the Ukrainians have some 600,000 fighters. And they didn't. They came in with 200,000 soldiers, which means that they must have, because they're not stupid. You said Putin, like him or not, but he's a smart person. He's good at what he's doing. So he didn't make a mistake. Rather, he has a different objective, meaning he wants to denazify Ukraine, and he wants to protect those people who are Russia friendly, which is a large part of the population. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes, the 26%, I believe, of the population in Ukraine is ethnic Russian, and then a larger percentage, speak Russian as the first language. There's another objective too, which a military objective, which is the demilitarization.
Yeah.
That is the fact that the Ukrainian military had become a de facto proxy of NATO. Russia has decided that they will not allow this NATO-like structure to exist on its borders, and therefore they're going to dismantle it. It could have been done voluntarily, or it can be done the way it's being done right now, which is through the application of extreme violence. And then both these military objectives are attached to an overall political objective, which is the neutrality of Ukraine, that Ukraine will not be a NATO member ever in perpetuity. Not going to happen. Yeah. And that's what precipitated this conflict to begin with. This is the expansion of NATO eastward. Despite assurances given back in 1990 to Mikhail Gorbachev that they wouldn't take advantage of the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. Now, the Warsaw Pact didn't collapse when they did it, but Germany had unified, and that was the beginning of the end. And everybody knew that when they talked about not 1 inch eastward, that it was not just Germany they were talking about what would happen eventually when the rest of the Warsaw Pact, dissolved. But this expansion was deemed to be a threat by Russia with just cause. NATO keeps calling itself a defensive alliance, but the fact of the matter is, in recent history, NATO has been an offensive alliance. Not just an offensive alliance, but an offensive alliance that's geared towards regime change. The attack on Serbia was designed to remove Slobodan Milosevic from power. The attack on Libya was designed to remove Muammar Gaddafi from power. The reinforcement of Iraq in 2004, the training mission, certified a military campaign that was designed to remove Saddam Hussein from power. And of course, the efforts in Afghanistan, deemed to be nation building in nature, were in support of regime change of the Taliban. So it's not just that NATO is an offensive organization. NATO is an offensive organization whose military objectives almost always include regime change. So now you have this expansive, offensive-oriented military alliance moving towards your border, and they've deemed you to be enemy number one. They don't use the term enemy, but you are protagonist number one. You are the reason NATO exists, being Russia. So as the Russians watch this happen, they basically are saying, we're not going to swallow this poison pill. We're going to swat it away. We're going to change the dynamic. And one of the things the Russians, one of their goals that go beyond Ukraine is to redefine a European security framework. They've outlined what that would look like in a treaty, that the draft treaty they submitted to NATO in the United States in December of 2021. And this is also one of their objectives, that once the issue of Ukraine is resolved, Russia then will turn to the issue of NATO. And if NATO thinks for a second that this crisis is over, they're wrong. And this crisis will be multifaceted in nature. It has numerous components, one of which is the economic component. I think today is the day that the gas is going to get shut off throughout Europe if they don't pay for it in rubles. If If the German chancellor hasn't figured it out yet, he committed political and economic suicide by aligning himself with the United States on this issue. And I think the rest of the so-called democratic leaders of Europe are going to figure this out too. The wonderful thing about democracy is that you are ultimately held accountable to your constituents. And if you've created this set of circumstances that have industry shutting down, heat being turned off, your country ceasing to function normally, I always recall the words of James Carville, who was Bill Clinton's a campaign advisor back when Bill Clinton was running for office and running for president in the early 1990s. Clinton was talking about foreign policy and all this stuff. And Carville said, no, it's the economy, stupid. That's the only thing you need to worry about if you want to get in power. People vote their pocketbooks. And right now, the pocketbooks of Europe are about to become empty. And the Russians know this. So the Russians are going to be pressing forward advantages, not just a geopolitical advantage they're shaping in Ukraine in terms of demonstrated military supremacy. Because this isn't just about beating Ukraine. Russia is defeating NATO. This is a huge embarrassment for NATO. NATO set Ukraine up to fail. And this is on the heels of yet another NATO embarrassment in Afghanistan. So NATO is coming out of this not looking strong. Joe Biden can come and give all the speeches he wants to in Poland and in Brussels. But the reality is NATO is impotent. They look impotent. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to react. And now they're talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars and beefing up their military to respond to this new Russian reality when their economy is about to tank. Where do they think they're going to get that money? Do they think American troops are just going to magically appear on their soil? They don't understand the modern reality of America. You want American troops? You pay for American troops. Because we're going to, have to gin up new brigades. We only have 9 armored brigades in the United States military. We have just pivoted on a geopolitical level to confronting China in the Pacific, which means many of these brigades are earmarked for potential conflict in South Korea, and who knows what we're going to gin up regarding Taiwan. So it's not like we have a bunch of armored brigades sitting around that we can just willy-nilly throw into Europe. The last time we confronted Russia, it wasn't about armored brigades, it was about armored divisions. Mm-hmm. We had things called the 2nd Armored Division. We don't have that anymore. We had the 3rd Armored Division. We don't have that anymore. We have 2 armored divisions, I believe, the 1st Armored Division and the 1st Cavalry Division. And then we have several armored brigades that are attached to mechanized infantry divisions. We don't fight at the division level anymore. We don't fight at corps level. Guess who does? The Russians. They're proving it right now. So, NATO is talking about beefing up its security on the eastern flank with what troops? Who's going to do this? The 82nd Airborne? They are road bumps. I have a lot of respect for soldiers who jump out of airplanes. It's pretty cool. But when they land on the ground, they're still just an infantryman with a rifle, maybe some mortars, maybe some javelin missiles. That's it. And when the Russians come at them with the First Guards Tank Army, they die instantly. You think the Polish military is ready to stand up to the Russians? You think the Romanian military is ready to stand up to the Russians? You think any of the Baltic militaries are ready to stand? You think the 4 battle groups that NATO has assembled in the Baltics and Poland are ready to stand up to the Russians? They're not, because they're small and they don't have any depth. When they get into battle, war is a grinding, bloody process, as Ukraine has proven. And when you take a reinforced battalion-sized battle group and throw it into combat, and it grinds down, and you don't have any reserves, it's over. It's over. They can fight bravely, but they will die bravely. And they will be taken prisoner bravely. That's the reality of NATO today. And now NATO is confronted with, they've had 30 plus years of leisure activity, living off of the fat of American military strength. The German army used to be something to applaud. I'm not a fan of German militarism, but during the Cold War, the West German army was a very competent army, a very large army with large armored formations. Today, the German army is a joke. a literal joke. They cannot maintain their forces. In order to put that battle group into Lithuania, my God, German tanks in Lithuania, who would have thought it could ever happen again? I mean, just the vision of that alone tells you that the Germans are incompetent.
Yeah.
But now you come to the fact they want to put this battalion there. The 2 armored brigades that they had to cannibalize because they can't get the brigade out of the caserne because nothing works. They haven't maintained it. And even if they got it out, they don't know how to fight. So who are the Germans fooling? And now they want to spend $100 billion to magically recreate the Wehrmacht. I mean, it's crazy talk. And to what purpose? The Russians do not want to refight the Battle of Berlin. So Berliners, you're safe. The Russians aren't coming for you unless you push it.
Unless we push it. And some of this has been happening. Some of this push has been happening.
All the Russians want is a return to the 1997 NATO structure. Mm-hmm. They're not saying that Poland and the Baltics and Romania and Bulgaria have to leave NATO. No, Russia doesn't care. Stay. Mm-hmm. But what they don't want is NATO infrastructure brought into these countries close to the Russian border. So they want to redo. And if NATO would just put on their thinking caps, they would recognize that this is sound. This is positive, because anything other than that recreates the Cold War, which Russia is ready right now to fight, and NATO's not. Yeah. So why do you want to create the conditions for something you are not ready to do, and frankly speaking, will never be ready to do, because Russia is getting ready to shut down the European economy. Yeah. And how are you going to pay for this militarization? And even if you do this, does Europe really want to totally surrender itself to the United States? Because that's what's about to happen. Yeah. If Europe buys into this new NATO, et cetera, Europe is going to be, subordinate itself politically, militarily, and economically to the United States. Who's making money out of this whole shift to gas? It's not Russia. It's the United States. If Europe stops buying Russian gas and starts buying American gas, even if the Americans could provide it in the quantities that Europe needed, Europe's going to be paying through the nose for this gas. It's going to be more expensive. Yeah. So if this is really the direction Europe wants to go, so be it. But if they were smart, they'd consider not only the reality of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, but what's getting ready to happen economically and frankly politically to the rest of Europe because of NATO's irresponsible expansion eastward.
May I ask Scott at this moment about the thorny issue of Russian troop morale? This seems to be one of the most contested elements of the war in propaganda right now. We see a large amount of Ukrainian signals intelligence rebroadcast by Western media claiming that there are mass defections and mutinies among the naval infantry and the ground troops. Perhaps an over-egged claim that many of the troops are poorly trained and equipped Russian Muslims from the Caucasus and Central Asia or the Siberian Muslim belt, and these men have no affinity with what is going on. A lot of desperate call mama type signals intelligence suggesting that the Russians aren't even getting a chance to engage Ukrainian eyeballs, because in some calls that have been disseminated, the claim is before we even see them, they hit us with their grads. Now, how much of this can you take at face value, particularly given that the boss of my old institution, the British Signals Intelligence Agency, GCHQ, Jeremy Fleming, said just a couple of days ago in Australia, and very interesting that a single source intelligence boss would even dare to say this. He wouldn't have done it in my time, but he is now saying that what the claim is, the Russians are not able to win this war, and Putin's military bosses are afraid to tell him the truth. This claim has also been echoed, by the way, by the incoming chief of the British General Staff, Admiral Tony Radakin. How much credence do you set in this? Why would the claim be made at all? And how much of a picture can you get from signals intelligence on its own as to Russian morale?
Well, let's start with the larger picture. Why would they be doing this? Especially, why would the head of GCHQ be speaking about intelligence matters of some of the most sensitive sources of intelligence imaginable? I mean, you and I both have I assume, have worked in the SIGINT field, and we understand that when you finally are able to get into a target through SIGINT, the last thing you want to do is give any hint that this has occurred, because in an instant, all that goes away. And if that's satellite driven, you've lost billions of dollars. If it's tactical driven, you've lost hundreds, if not thousands of hours of trying to position yourself to exploit the target. And there's no guarantee you're going to get it back. So right off the bat, why is he doing this? And the answer is, I believe, not to reinforce the narrative coming from the mainstream media about, the demise of the Russians and stuff. It's part of a larger, broader information war that's taking place in the West, targeting the Russian population. The goal and objective, if you combine information war, you create the concept of inevitable Russian military defeat, combined with the economic sanctions that are damaging, to create the conclusion that the problem isn't NATO, the problem is Putin. The goal of the United States was set out by Putin, by Biden. He blurted it out: regime change. Yeah. That's always been the goal. We've never shied from it. Michael McFaul admits it. If you take a look at the Russian reset in 2009, it was about regime change to replace Vladimir Putin with Dmitry Medvedev. 100% regime change. And when it was failing, Biden, then vice president, flew to Moscow on March 3rd, I believe, of 2011, meeting with political opposition leaders that are paid for by the United States and Great Britain. And he said, if I were Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't run for office again, because it's not going to work out for you. What are you doing? That's regime change. It's not violent regime change, but it's still regime change. Hillary Clinton spoke out against Putin's party during the parliamentary elections in December of 2011, causing Vladimir Putin to chastise her and say, you're interfering with our affairs, trying to shape the presidential election. Yeah. So the goal is regime change, and this is information war. It's trying to create an image of Russian incompetence, military impotence, and de facto they're never going to win, so that the Russian people start to question their leadership. I don't think it's working, because Putin's popularity raising just keeps going up. But now we come to, is this true? Because it's one thing about the objective, but now we come down to the nuts and bolts of the intelligence. Is what they're saying true? I don't know. Did you work, Alex? You don't have to answer too much, but did you work the Soviet target or the Russian target?
Yes, it was my target.
Do you have respect for that target?
Absolutely.
Do you view them as the most incompetent people on the face of the earth?
That's the last term I would use for them.
Correct. So now I'm going to basically say that to buy into what people are talking about implies that the Russians are the most incompetent people on the face of the earth when it comes to communication security. Let's start off with a statement of fact. Every Russian soldier, before they went into Ukraine, stood inspection. And the counterintelligence people went through every piece of their kit, ensuring that there were no personal electronic devices. No Russian soldier has a cell phone in Ukraine.
So if I may interrupt you just there, Scott, the shock and awe propaganda of this week from I don't think from the official Ukrainian MOD, but from these embedded far-right elements, is one of supposedly the corpse of a Russian soldier from which a mobile phone has been extracted, and the troops who've dispatched him call mama and gloat over how he's now in bits spread over the field. So how does that square with fairly elementary ComSec such as you have described, which even the West in its better days would have done before sending its troops into enemy territory?
Well, what it squares is we're looking at a very sophisticated information warfare propaganda ploy. First of all, let's talk about the cell phones. Here in the United States, you might be able to find one or two Luddites who haven't put in some sort of security code or facial recognition feature or whatever. So the idea that a Russian soldier, A, has his phone on him, and B, it's going to ring and it's going to say mama, and C, a third party is going to be able to pick it up and access it because my phone, when it rings and says mama, and I hit, I want to answer it, it says, please enter your security code before the phone. That didn't happen. It said mama, and he, boom, answered. So it tells you it's a ploy. This is pure propagandistic ploy. What even the Ukrainians have had to admit as it became clear that their story about cell phones, because the Russian mommers are going, wait a minute, a boy's got his phone? How come he's not calling me? Yeah. You got 1 million Russian or 200,000 Russian mamas calling the Ministry of Defense saying, why aren't they calling? And the Ministry of Defense saying, because they don't have their cell phones. Well, what about that? It's a lie. Nobody has their cell phones. And the Ukrainians went, yeah, it's not working. So, here's the news story. The Russians are stealing Ukrainian cell phones from the innocent population. And then the Russian soldiers are using those cell phones to call home to mama. Now, again, it's the same problem. Let's just say that I'm Private even Schmuckatelli, and I've decided I want to call home to mama. So I find a Ukrainian civilian, and I butt stroke him in the face, and I grab his cell phone. Even if I'm clever enough to take his thumb to get his biometrics or hold it up to his face or put a pistol to his head and get the security code, do I remember that? Because the face only works one time.
Yeah. I can attest to this. And also, not only that everyone in Eastern Europe uses security codes and mostly Android-based phones as well, but more particularly that for lack of paid call time, mostly they will use the Viber app, the Eastern equivalent, Eastern European market equivalent of WhatsApp. And again, there you're going to need cell data. And again, Absolutely. The SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence service, will presumably, I haven't checked this for myself for my faults, but will presumably have put a blanket ban on calling numbers beginning with country code +7. So there's another obstacle to this claim, isn't it?
This is just pure fiction. So now we come down to the phone calls. So we've established that the likelihood of a Russian picking up the phone and calling home to mama is slim to none. But what about these recorded calls? They're all faked. They're literally all faked. They are the SBU. And I will tell you, it's not the SBU alone. Even before this war started, the CIA and MI6 was heavily integrated with the Ukrainian intelligence services.
Extremely heavily, going back 15 years before.
Right. And one of the aspects that's going on right now is information warfare. The CIA has an entire... Well, hell, MI6 has or IO. Imagine what IO stands for, Information Operations. Their whole job is black propaganda. The CIA, under the Special Activities Group, whatever they call them nowadays, and the Director of Operations, has a political action element, a component of which is information warfare, information operations. They have been working with the Ukrainians from day one to shape this image. And what we're looking at is a very sophisticated information operation with so-called intercepted conversations. They're not intercepted conversations of secure Russian comms, because Russian comms, I have to laugh, because the implication is that the Russians can't communicate. Mm-hmm. That's the implication here, that because some of these calls are from, subordinate officers calling their superior officers with the most whiny of messages. We're hungry. We don't have any ammo. We don't have any fuel. We're scared. What are we doing here? Absurd in the extreme. Again, study the Russian target. I can tell you right now that the idea of a Russian battalion tactical group getting ready to cross into Ukraine, thinking it's an exercise,
no way,
is childlike. They also thinking that they don't know where they're going is childlike. These troops have been well briefed on several things. One, what their immediate tactical objectives are, how that immediate tactical objective feeds into an overall operational concept, and two, what their rules of engagement are. And this is a critical factor, because there was an interview with a Russian general a couple days into the war, because people like myself were going, what are the Russians doing, man? Their doctrine calls for overwhelming artillery fire and then massed attacks. And what I'm looking at is no artillery fire and these light probes. What's going on? And what was going on, according to this general, was what they called the Syrian approach. Now, again, if the Western media will say, aha, that proves that the Russians are going to blow Aleppo up, level it, bring in chemical weapons, and kill civilians, because that's what we've been told the Russians do in Syria. But no, what the Russians do in Syria is surround a civilian population and then give them the opportunity to evacuate with buses. They evacuate all the jihadists out of the areas around Damascus and in southern Libya or Syria, and they took them up to Idlib, where they're concentrated now. So the Russian approach was designed to deliberately avoid unnecessary civilian casualties, which is a stated objective of the Ministry of Defense. They have ordered their troops not to kill, not to target civilians, not to damage civilian infrastructure needlessly. I mean, you never target a civilian, but also to be careful about the application of force so you don't damage the civilian infrastructure. When civilian infrastructure is damaged, it's because the Ukrainians made a decision to turn that into a military target. But my point here is that these troops are extremely well briefed, and we know it. So the idea of this poor, besotted, Ivan Schmuckatelli not knowing anything and just hopping in his vehicle and driving along, and oh my God, I'm in the train, and oh crap, they're firing at me, and oh damn, everybody's dying, and oh, woe is me, call mama. No, that just isn't happening at all. We know this because we've seen the Russian. They've captured the Russian tanks, and if you look at the Russian tanks, there's secure comms in the Russian tanks. So we know they have secure comms. So if the Russian tanks have secure comms, they ain't using a cell phone because A, they don't have a cell phone, and B, it's the dumbest thing to do because the second you use a cell phone, you've given away your location to a modern opponent who is out there with electronic warfare capability, tracking cell calls, geolocating, calling in fire. That's how we're killing a lot of these idiots that's how the Russians are killing a lot of these idiots that are torturing Russian soldiers, etc., because they use a cell phone and then they post it on social media. And that creates a signal that then gets intercepted, identifies who did it, and then Russian special forces, who are very good, by the way, come in, grab them, and it's not going to be a good day for these people. But my point is, to get back to the basics here, the whole cell phone thing, the whole intercepted phone call thing just doesn't stand the smell test. You'd have to assume that the Russians are incompetent, that the Russians didn't spend billions of dollars upgrading their comms. In 2008, Russia went to war against Georgia. Short little 5-day war that they were horrible in. They were awful, and they knew it. And the Russian generals afterwards said, man, we're lucky, because the Georgians knew how to fight. The Georgians were trained by Marines, and the Georgians were doing some wonderful stuff tactically, really bad stuff operationally, and a bad strategic idea to go in. But tactically, they were doing well, but they lacked the mass. So the Russians were able to come in with artillery and armor and grind them down and move on. But the Russians were saying, we're not that good. We're really actually pretty bad. We're lucky that the Georgians didn't have more capability, because it could have been a different outcome on the battlefield. So they started a dramatic modernization program, and we saw some of this in 2014 with the Little Green Men and stuff. But even then, the Russians weren't all there. Around 2016, they started to reorganize their military, going away from a pure brigade model, now bringing back, for instance, the 1st Guards Tank Army, the 20th Combined Arms Army, large offensive-oriented.
This is the key, isn't it, though, Scott? It's combined arms, really, because from the beginning of the Cold War onwards, they had inherited the operational level of warfare, which had largely won them the Eastern Front, and then combined arms was largely regarded as a NATO, largely UK, Canadian, US speciality until recently. But I think you're making a good case here that from about the middle of last decade, Russia has been the master of combined arms ops.
Not just Russia is the master of combined arms. Look, I used to be the master of combined arms operation. When I was in the Marine Corps, I came up as a junior officer when the Marine Corps was embracing maneuver warfare in a big way. From a conceptual standpoint, the philosophy of it ingrained. General Al Gray was the commandant, and he brought it down. And I spent 2.5 years in 29 Palms, California, mastering maneuver warfare, combined arms operations at an artillery battalion. And we were self-propelled, and we spent 250 days a year in the field, firing live ammunition all the time, and we were masters of our profession. Well, guess what? We don't do that anymore. For the last 20 years, we've been running around in Afghanistan and Iraq doing low-intensity conflict, counterinsurgency operations. We were very good at kicking down the doors of civilian houses, shooting civilians. We're very good at dropping drone strikes on wedding parties. We're not very good at combined arms operations because we don't do it anymore. Now we're trying to rapidly do it, but we don't have the military to do it anymore. The reason why I brought up 250 days a year in the field and the amount of ammunition we shot is that's expensive. To become really good at this is an expensive proposition, and it requires constant training. You don't simply go through a quick course and then go back to the garrison and then suddenly be thrown 6 to 8 months later into the field and be expected to. You lived it, you breathed it, you ate it, you slept it. It was your life, because that's the reality. It's so complex. It is so complex, this kind of combined arms maneuver warfare, that you have to literally make it part of your DNA. And we didn't just forget how to do it. We scooped out that DNA and threw it away. We embraced low intensity conflict. And now we're looking at the Russians applying combined arms war in Ukraine. And there's a growing recognition from any military professional that we can't do that. We don't know how to do that.
Do you think, Scott, that this was the substance of what Sergei Shoigu, the Russian Minister of Defense, said to his US counterpart when unexpectedly the US Secretary of State for Defense accompanied Biden on the last bilateral with Putin? Do you think the threat was, we will box you in?
Well, the Russians, I don't think, are in the business of making threats. They can imply threats. But the Russians are very sophisticated. I give them a lot of credit. As much as we respect their military, I respect their diplomacy even more. I know Sergei Lavrov. I've worked with him. He was at the UN. A very, very clever, intelligent diplomat, backed up with a diplomatic corps that is second to none. So the Russians don't do. I mean, again, that's just one of the things that cracks you when you hear all these people. Well, the Russians are, sending a signal and they're blunt and they lie and no, they don't. The Russians are sophisticated. The Russians are polite. The Russians give you every opportunity to take the off ramp before it becomes too late. And I think Shoigu was making the point that he was making is that there is a military technical component to our solution that we don't want to have to apply, that we prefer to do this diplomatically. But I'm here to remind you that if you ignore us, that we've put this new security framework out there to be worked out. If you ignore us, I exist. Mm-hmm. And I'm just here to remind you that I exist. I'm not making a threat. I'm simply saying I exist. Mm-hmm. And don't forget that. And I think we forgot it. We didn't take the Russians seriously. Yes. I mean, we've denigrated them, we've demeaned them, we've belittled them. And the Russians right now are basically saying, we are here. Yeah. As Putin said in 2018. We told you.
Do you think, Scott, that the US... Do you think the US and the British took the Germans seriously when the Germans seemed to have been hinting last year that they were in no state, nor was any other continental European armed service, to do what might have been expected of it if there was a ramping up in Ukraine? Or do you think that the British and Americans continued to fancy that continental Europe would be able to hold out for them in the late Cold War model of hold the Fulda Gap for a couple of weeks while we arrive?
I can't speak to the British anymore, but except to say that I think the Croatian prime minister got it right when the British Minister of Defense showed up and he said, we're not meeting you. A, you're not a member of the European Union anymore, so why would I meet with you? And B, you're Britain. Mm-hmm. You got nothing, man. You got nothing. Mm-hmm. Your military is a joke. Mm-hmm. Get out of here. When Croatia says the British military is a joke, then the British military is a joke. The player here is the United States. Mm-hmm. And the United States has become a prisoner of its own rhetoric. We're very good at throwing words out. We're very good at making promises, as if we can, by creating the perception of grandeur actually exists. We saw that in Afghanistan when Joe Biden in July called up Ashraf Ghani, the president, and Ghani's crying. There's a he's saying, I got 15 to 20,000 Taliban and Pakistani jihadists coming across the border, and I've got nothing to stop them with except your air power. You're slowing down your airstrikes. I need you to ramp that up or else it's all over. It's done. And Biden said, whoa, shut up. I need you to go and tell everybody everything's going to be okay. We have to create the perception that everything's going to be okay. And this is a direct quote from Biden, even if it's not true. So Biden instructed the Afghan president at a moment in time when his country is literally falling to the enemy to lie, to create the perception that everything's okay. Now we come to Germany, NATO, and Europe. The Germans aren't stupid. The Germans know their economy better than anybody. And the Germans did the math and said, if we lose Russian gas, we're in trouble. Fact is, all of Europe looked at that and said, because it's a cascading effect, given the way that it's integrated. You can't just wall off the German economy from Europe. If the German economy falls, the French economy falls. If the French economy falls, the Spanish economy falls. It's a domino effect that happens instantaneously. So all of Europe went, we got a Russian energy problem here. And the United States said, don't worry about it. We got you covered. We have a plan B. We didn't have a plan B. And Germany has just found that reality out.
Yeah.
We are told that the plan B was US liquefied natural gas being imported in bulk, which I think even Britain is not really completely set up to do. There is a port in West Wales to import it. I think Germany has one too, but you can't switch overnight, even if you can afford American LNG.
Well, even if there's enough American LNG, which there isn't. Yeah. You want to know one of the reasons why there's not enough American LNG? Because China bought it all. So the Americans are selling it to the Chinese because we're going to get greater profit at a time when Europe says we desperately need it. So how good of a friend is the United States? But even if all of the LNG was sent to Europe, Europe can't absorb it. And even if they could absorb it, it's still not enough. This is why the United States went to Qatar and tried to get Qatar to basically redirect its liquid natural. We even went to Algeria and begged the Algerians to send gas to Europe. Algeria told us to take a hike. The Qataris are looking at it. But the fact is, all the assurances the United States gave amount to a hill of beans. They're nothing. And now Europe's left holding an empty bag with Russia getting ready to play hardball.
Yep.
And if anybody thinks that Russia's joking around, I hope people come out of this understanding that Vladimir Putin does not bluff at all. And when
I think that the strongest testimony to what you're saying there, Scott, is that all the intelligentsia, the pro-Western or Western-leaning but moderately so people in all of the countries neighboring Russia are saying, well, we may have to bolt, we may have to flee the region completely because, okay, we have our question marks over their reasoning when they say, I don't want to live under a Putin-dominated Europe. You can accept or reject that reasoning. But the fact that they are all saying that implies that they, who know the Russians better than anyone, these bordering countries, know that this is not going to go away anytime soon. The Russians are not offering a feint. They're actually going to follow through on what they're threatening.
Yeah, and the Russian, look, I don't believe that Russia plans any military operations beyond Ukraine. I don't think, the Russians aren't suicidal. They're not going to test Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Although I believe if they did test it, Article 5 would fail. That's a heck of a gamble.
I do too.
Just in case people were serious about it, that could lead to a nuclear conflict. And Russia's not going that route. Russia is establishing its military credentials in Ukraine. And believe me, once all the propaganda goes away and true military professionals sit down and study what has happened here, the West is going to wake up and realize that Russia's fighting a war that they're not prepared to fight.
Yeah.
First of all, which Western democracy right now is willing to take 30 to 50,000 dead? None of them are. So, and that's what we're talking about when you fight the Russians. We're talking about, because Russia's not going to come in soft, Poland. Russia doesn't give a damn about the Polish civilian infrastructure. If Russia comes into Poland, they're going in with rolling barrages. They're going to kill everything, and then heavy masses of armor are going to push through and grind everything. While where's the Russian Air Force? It's coming in dribs and drabs. Why? They're holding in reserve. They've displayed the Kinzhal. I know I'm saying that wrong because my Russian language abilities were developed in college. Yeah, well, I drank beer and played football. But, but I do know it means dagger. But they've deployed 2 of them, not because they needed to fire them against the Ukrainian target, but to remind NATO that, hey, if you guys really want to play this game, we got a whole bunch of these, and you can't stop them. And whatever we aim them at, they're going to hit. And that includes, for instance, that wonderful shiny building you have in Brussels you call NATO headquarters. It will be gone. Poland, you got a Ministry of Defense? Bye-bye. England, you think your headquarters are going to be untouched? We're going to flatten them. Paris, it's all going to go bye-bye, guys. Not with nuclear, but with precision strike capabilities. That's the cost of going to war with Russia. So don't do it. But Russia doesn't need to go to war with Europe because Europe's going to surrender because of the economy. That's the Russian plan. And, what did you expect? Imagine, again, Vladimir Putin. And I'm not somebody that believes that Vladimir Putin is a dictator. I think Vladimir Putin is a long-serving, powerful executive at the head of a very large Russian civil service that's very competent. But that the civil service actually defines Russia's national security objectives, et cetera. Putin is simply the implementer of the policy that comes up from below. But Vladimir Putin sits down with Joe Biden, who looks him in the eye because Joe Biden is that kind of guy. And Biden tells Putin right to your face, don't do it, or I'm going to hit you with the massive sanction.